Hello everyone, welcome to our channel. We tell horror stories meant to keep you awake at night. Let's begin. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more horror stories. The reflection. Mara first noticed the reflection was wrong on a Tuesday morning. She stood in her bathroom, brushing her teeth, half asleep, eyes unfocused. The fluorescent light hummed overhead. When she spat into the sink and looked up, her reflection was still brushing. She froze. A second passed. Then her reflection stopped, slowly lowering the toothbrush, its eyes lifting to meet hers. The face was hers in every detail, same dark circles, same faint scar above the brow, but the expression was unfamiliar, curious, hungry. Mara laughed nervously and shook her head. Sleep deprivation, she told herself. Stress. She raised her hand. The reflection mirrored her perfectly again. For days after, nothing seemed out of place, yet unease lingered, a splinter beneath her thoughts. She avoided mirrors when she could, but reflections were everywhere. Windows, phone screens, darkened TVs. Sometimes she thought she saw movement just a fraction too slow, like a delay in reality catching up. On Friday night, the power went out. The apartment fell into darkness, broken only by moonlight spilling through the living room window. Mara lit a candle and moved cautiously, heart thudding louder than it should. When she passed the hallway mirror, she stopped. Her reflection was still there. The candlelight flickered, casting long shadows. In the glass, Mara stood holding the candle, but her reflection's head was tilted, lips curled into a faint smile. "You're imagining this," Mara whispered. The reflection's mouth moved. "You noticed," it said silently. Mara staggered back, knocking the candle to the floor. The flame sputtered out, plunging the apartment into darkness. She stood there, breath shallow, listening to the sound of her own pulse. Then she heard it. A soft knock. Not at the door. From inside the mirror. She fled to her bedroom and slammed the door, barricading it with a chair. She didn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt watched. When dawn finally came, pale and weak, she convinced herself to leave. Fresh air, distance. Outside, the city looked normal, too normal. People passed her, faces reflected in shop windows as they walked. Every reflection seemed to linger just a moment too long. At work, Vera avoided the restroom. She washed her hands in the break room sink, staring only at the faucet. But when she glanced sideways, she saw it in the stainless steel surface, her reflection standing still while she moved. That night, she covered every mirror in the apartment with sheets. She turned picture frames face down, unplugged screens, closed the laptop. Still, she felt it nearby, pacing just beyond sight. "You can't hide forever," a voice whispered. It came from everywhere, from the walls, from her own throat. She ran to the bathroom despite herself. The sheet over the mirror bulged outward, stretching as if something pressed against it from the other side. A hand-shaped impression appeared, fingers splayed, sliding slowly downward. Mara screamed and tore the sheet away. The mirror showed an empty bathroom. Relief hit her so hard she nearly collapsed. Then the reflection stepped forward. It pressed its palm against the glass, perfectly aligned with hers when she raised her trembling hand. The surface rippled like water. "I've been trapped so long, watching you live my life." "What are you?" Mara sobbed. The reflection's mouth widened. "I'm you, or I will be." Cracks spiderwebbed across the mirror as it leaned closer. Images flashed behind it, other faces, other people, all screaming silently as they were pulled away from their reflections, replaced. "You looked," it whispered.
That's all it takes. The glass shattered. Pain exploded through Mara as cold hands seized her, dragging her forward. She felt herself stretching, thinning, reality peeling away like skin. She tried to scream, but her voice echoed back at her, distorted and distant. Then she was on the other side. The world was muted here, muffled and flat. She pressed her hands against the glass, watching in horror as her reflection, no, the thing, stepped out into the bathroom, whole and solid. It flexed its fingers, testing its body. "Don't worry, I'll take good care of our life." The bathroom light flicked on. From inside the mirror, Mara watched as the door opened and closed, leaving her alone with countless other reflections staring back at her from the fractured glass. All of them trapped. All of them watching.
13 Mouths of God. The village of Carswell was built around 13 stone wells. No one remembered who dug them. The records burned long ago, and the elders spoke of the wells the way one spoke of weather: dangerous, inevitable, not to be questioned. Each well stood at a different edge of the village, evenly spaced, their black stone rims worn smooth by centuries of hands that should never have touched them. They were called the Mouths of God. Every child learned the rules early. Never look down a well alone. Never listen after sunset. And above all, never count the voices. Father Elric learned the truth too late. He arrived in Carswell under orders from a cathedral, sent to investigate reports of mass hysteria, blasphemy, and ritualized silence. The villagers greeted him politely, but kept their distance. They spoke softly, never raising their voices, never whispering. Silence, Elric would soon learn, was survival. On his first night, the bells rang 13 times. Elric jolted awake, heart pounding. The sound didn't come from the church tower. It came from below, vibrating through the stone foundations, echoing up from the earth itself. When the final toll faded, the village fell into perfect stillness. Then the wells spoke. The voices rose slowly, like breath drawn deep underground. Not screams, not cries, prayers, thousands of them. Elric pressed his hands to his ears, but the sound bypassed flesh, blooming directly inside his skull. Each voice was distinct, men, women, children, pleading, praising, confessing. Some begged for forgiveness. Others thanked something unseen for their suffering. At dawn, Elric confronted the elders. "You live over a mass grave," he said. "These wells are amplifying." "No," the oldest woman interrupted calmly. "They are feeding." She told him the story the church had buried. Long before Carswell had a name, something fell from the sky. Not an angel, not a demon. A god, wounded, incomplete, buried deep beneath the valley. It could not rise. It could not move. But it could listen. And it was starving. The wells were not dug to draw water. They were drilled down into the god's buried body. 13 openings pierced into its flesh so it could hear the world above. Each well was a mouth. Each voice offered to it became sustenance. Faith fed it. Fear nourished it. Pain strengthened it. The villagers learned quickly. Those who spoke their suffering aloud near the wells found their burdens eased briefly. Those who prayed deeply were rewarded with visions, miracles, healing that always came with a cost. And those who listened too long were taken. Elric laughed bitterly. "You're describing a parasite." The elder met his gaze. "So is your God. The difference is ours answers." That night, Elric went to the central well. Moonlight revealed movement in the darkness below, subtle, organic rippling, like a throat swallowing. He leaned closer, heart racing, and heard a voice rise above the others. His own, confessing sins he'd never spoken, doubts he'd buried, rage he'd denied. The well knew him already. The stone beneath his hands pulsed warmly. Elric staggered back as memories flooded him. Forgotten wars, burned villages, mass graves blessed in silence. He understood then why the church feared this place. The 13 mouths did not demand obedience. They demanded honesty. At midnight, the villagers gathered. They stood around the wells, heads bowed, mouths sealed. No chants, no hymns, only listening. The god drank deeply, its voices swelling into a deafening chorus. The ground trembled beneath Elric's feet as something vast shifted below. A new mouth began to open. The earth split near the church, stone cracking as a 14th well tore its way to the surface. Blood seeped from its rim, steaming in the cold air. The god was growing. "Elric," the elder shouted, "you brought it too much truth." The voices changed then. No longer prayers. Commands. "Feed me more." Hands burst from a new well, pale, fused together, fingers bent backward. Faces followed, stretched and incomplete, mouths open wider than anatomy allowed. These were not the dead. They were offerings that hadn't finished dissolving. Elric realized the final horror. The 13 mouths of God were never meant to be permanent. They were supposed to close once the god was healed. But humanity never stopped feeding it. As the village collapsed into chaos, Elric climbed the church bell tower. With trembling hands, he rang the bell, not 13 times, but endlessly, shattering the rhythm that bound the ritual. The well screamed. The ground convulsed as the god recoiled, starving, its mouths collapsing inward. Stone cracked. Wells imploded. Voices cut off mid-prayer. At dawn, Carswell was gone. In its place lay a vast crater filled with blackened stone and silence so deep it hurt to breathe. The cathedral declared the village destroyed by a sinkhole. The report was sealed. But sometimes in quiet places where the earth feels thin, people swear they hear it. A voice below, asking them to speak.
Voices in the attic. The attic door had never opened on its own before. Lena was certain of that. She had lived in the old farmhouse for nearly a year, long enough to learn every creak of its aging bones. The attic was sealed shut with a warped wooden hatch in the hallway ceiling, its handle rusted, its edges painted over and over again by previous owners who clearly wanted it forgotten. So when Lena came home one evening and found the hatch hanging open, a ladder dangling down like an invitation, her stomach tightened with dread. At first, she told herself it must have been the house settling. Old homes did strange things, but as she stood beneath the opening, she heard it. A whisper. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even clear. It sounded like several voices speaking at once, layered and distant, as if carried through thick walls. Lena strained to listen, heart pounding. The words slipped away the moment she focused on them, leaving only a faint murmur that crawled along her spine. She backed away and shut the hatch. That night, she dreamed of narrow spaces and splintered beams pressing in from all sides. She dreamed of mouths opening in the dark, speaking her name in voices she almost recognized. When she woke, the whispering hadn't stopped. It seeped through the ceiling, through the walls, into her thoughts. During the day, it faded to a low hum she could ignore. At night, it grew louder, more insistent. Sometimes it sounded like crying, sometimes like laughter cut short. On the fourth night, Lena climbed the ladder. Dust coated every surface of the attic, thick enough to mute her footsteps. The air was stale and cold, carrying the scent of rot and something metallic. Her flashlight beams swept across old furniture draped in sheets, broken toys, stacks of forgotten boxes. The whispering grew clearer the farther she moved from the ladder. "Help us." The voices brushed against her ears, overlapping and frantic. She nearly fled then, but curiosity rooted her in place. The voices didn't sound threatening, they sounded afraid. In the far corner of the attic stood a large wooden trunk bound with iron straps. Its lid was slightly ajar. The whispering poured from inside. Lena's hands trembled as she reached out and lifted the lid. Inside were journals, dozens of them stacked neatly, their covers cracked with age. Each was labeled with a name and a date. Some dates were recent, too recent. As Lena flipped one open, the whispering surged, the ink bleeding and reforming into sentences she hadn't read aloud. "We hear them too. They won't let us leave." Her breath caught. She opened another journal. "They say if we listen long enough, we can stay." A realization crept over her, slow and terrible. These weren't stories written by one person. They were confessions, records left behind by people who'd lived in this house and never truly left it. The attic groaned.
The whispering grew louder, surrounding her now, voices pressing close to her ears. Shapes stirred in the shadows beyond the flashlight's reach, suggestions of faces, mouths opening and closing in the dark beams of the roof. "They're lonely," the whispers murmured. "They want to be heard." Lena stumbled back, heart racing. "I can hear you," she said, her voice shaking. "What do you want?" Silence fell instantly. Then one voice spoke clearly, close enough to feel against her skin. "Stay." The attic shifted. The ladder behind her creaked, then slowly pulled upward out of reach. Panic surged through her as the air grew heavier, pressing against her chest. The journals rustled, pages flipping on their own, whispering faster now, overlapping until the sound became unbearable. She ran for the hatch, but the floorboards softened beneath her feet, sinking slightly, as if the house itself were swallowing her. Hands formed in the dust, grasping at her ankles. Faces emerged from the shadows, familiar, pleading, desperate. "We listened. Now it's your turn." Lena screamed as the attic darkened completely. Downstairs, the house fell silent. Weeks later, a realtor showed the farmhouse to a young couple. She laughed lightly as she explained that the attic was sealed and best left alone. As they left, the man paused, frowning. "Do you hear that?" he asked. From above, faint and layered, voices whispered softly through the ceiling, welcoming them home.
The Forgotten. No one visited Gray Hollow anymore. The town didn't appear on most maps, and when it did, it was marked as an empty patch between forests, like a mistake no one bothered to correct. The road leading in was cracked and narrow, swallowed by weeds, the welcome sign half-rotted and unreadable. People said the town had been abandoned after a fire decades ago. Others said it was a sinkhole scare. The truth was quieter and worse. Lena felt it the moment she crossed the town limits. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the sensation of being watched and dismissed. She parked near what had once been the main street. Buildings sagged inward, windows dark and hollow, doors hanging open like mouths frozen mid-scream. Leaves skittered across the asphalt, but there was no wind. The air was heavy, stale, as though the town had been sealed away from time. "This is it," she murmured, lifting her camera. Lena was a documentarian, drawn to forgotten places. She believed stories lived in ruins. Gray Hollow was supposed to be her next project, a town erased from memory, perfect for her series on abandoned America. Her footsteps echoed too loudly as she walked. Every sound seemed to linger, stretching unnaturally before fading. She noticed something strange almost immediately. There were no signs of life at all. No birds, no insects, not even the buzz of flies around decay. The first building she entered was a school. Desks lay overturned, chalkboards cracked, children's drawings still pinned to corkboards. The drawings made her pause. Stick figures stood beside tall, shadowy shapes. Smiling suns hung above scenes that felt wrong. Every page had the same words scribbled at the bottom, written in different childish hands. "Remember us." A chill crawled up her spine. As she raised her camera, she caught movement in the corner of the lens. She turned quickly. Nothing. Still, the feeling intensified, the sense that something nearby had noticed her, and then lost interest. Outside, she wandered deeper into town. The houses grew smaller, closer together, as if huddling. Family photos were still visible through broken windows. Faces stared out, eyes scratched away, names torn from frames. Lena began to realize something unsettling. No one had names here. In the old records she'd studied, Gray Hollow's population numbers existed, but the individual details were missing.
census lists with blank spaces, birth certificates without signatures, graves in the cemetery marked only with dates, no names carved into the stone. As evening fell, fog rolled in low and thick, curling around her ankles. The silence deepened until it rang in her ears. Then she heard it, whispering. Not voices exactly, more like echoes of speech, layered and distant, as if remembered rather than spoken. Lena followed the sound to the town square. At its center stood a dry fountain, cracked and empty. Someone was standing inside it. The figure was tall and thin, its shape blurred, edges soft like smoke. As Lena stepped closer, she realized it wasn't alone. More figures emerged from the fog, dozens of them, standing silently along the streets, half-formed and colorless. Their faces were smooth, features faint as though unfinished. "Hello?" Lena called, her voice trembling. The nearest figure tilted its head. When it spoke, its voice came from many mouths at once. "We see us." Lena swallowed. "What happened here?" The figures drifted closer, their forms sharpening slightly as they moved into her awareness, empty eyes fixed on her. "We were forgotten," they said. Images flooded her mind, people living ordinary lives, slowly losing notice. Mail stopped coming, names faded from conversations, children went uncounted at school. When the fire came, no one reported it. When the smoke rose, no one saw. They hadn't died all at once. They were erased. We remain only when remembered, but no one remembers. Lena felt her thoughts slipping, details blurring. She struggled to recall why she'd come here. The town's name felt distant, unimportant. "No," she gasped, clutching her camera. "I'll tell your story. I'll show people." The figures hesitated. Hope flickered across their fading faces, but the fog thickened, pressing in. Lena's vision tunneled. Her hands felt numb. She looked down and saw her fingers growing pale, translucent. The figures reached for her. "Stay," they pleaded. "If you leave, you will forget. If you forget, we vanish." Her camera slipped from her grasp, hitting the ground with a dull thud. The last thing Lena remembered was the word remember, echoing in her mind like a prayer. Weeks later, a hiker passed near the overgrown road by Gray Hollow. He noticed an old car parked crookedly, door ajar. Inside was a camera, its battery dead. When the photos were developed, they showed empty streets, broken buildings, and faint shapes standing just beyond the edge of the frame. No one could remember who took them, and Gray Hollow remained forgotten.
The Bone Orchard. The orchard did not appear on any map. It lay beyond the last gravel road outside the town of Grenton, hidden behind a leaning fence and a line of dead trees that seemed to absorb sound. Locals passed it without looking, eyes fixed forward, as if the land itself punished attention. They called it the Bone Orchard, but never aloud. Names had power there. Mara Holt discovered it by accident while surveying land for the county. Satellite images showed a patch of unusual density, trees planted too evenly, soil too pale. Curiosity overrode instinct, as it often did. She parked her truck and followed the fence until she found the broken gate. The air changed the moment she stepped through. The orchard stretched farther than it should have, rows of pale, leafless trees receding into a gray haze. Their branches curve inward, interlocking overhead like ribs. The ground beneath Mara's boots crunched softly, not with gravel or dry leaves, but something brittle. She looked down. Bones. Not whole skeletons, fragments. Fingers. Teeth. Slivers of rib and vertebra ground into the soil until the earth itself looked bleached. The tree's roots twisted visibly above ground, wrapped tightly around femurs and skulls as if feeding from them. Mara swallowed and raised her camera. As soon as she took the first photo, the orchard breathed. It was subtle at first, a collective sigh that rippled through the branches. The trees creaked, their bark shifting like tightening skin. Somewhere deeper in the rows, something cracked loudly, like a joint snapping back into place. She should have left. Instead, she walked forward. Each tree bore a small wooden tag nailed into its trunk, the markings worn by time. Mara brushed one clean and froze. A name. Below it, a date. The next tree bore another. And another. Hundreds of them, stretching deeper into the orchard. Some dates were centuries old. Others were recent, too recent. She realized then that this wasn't a burial ground. It was a garden. The whispering began as she reached the orchard center. Soft voices rose from the soil, layered and dry, like breath through teeth. They spoke names, not theirs but hers. Memories surfaced uninvited, childhood guilt, words left unsaid, people she'd failed to protect. The orchard knew her. At the heart of the rows stood a massive tree, thicker than the rest, its trunk swollen and knotted into shapes that resembled faces frozen mid-scream. Beneath it lay a shallow pit filled with bones stacked carefully, reverently, as if arranged by hand. The caretaker waited there. He appeared human at first, tall, thin, wrapped in a coat the color of old parchment. His face was smooth and pale, eyes dark and reflective like polished stone. "You're early," he said gently. Mara staggered back. "What is this place?" The caretaker smiled sadly. "A solution." He told her the truth as the orchard listened. Long ago, when famine and war bled the land dry, the first settlers discovered something buried beneath the soil, an intelligence that thrived on remembrance. Death alone did not feed it. Being forgotten did. So they made a bargain. The dead would be planted, not buried. Given names. Given purpose. In return, the land would prosper. The orchard grew fruit once, sweet and abundant. But as generations passed, the harvest changed. Flesh rotted. Bones remained. The orchard adapted. Now it grows guilt, the caretaker said softly. Regret. Unfinished lives. Mara tried to run. The ground shifted, roots rising to snare her ankles. The whispering surged, voices pleading, accusing, begging to be acknowledged. Faces pushed up through the soil, half-formed skulls opening hollow mouths. "Please," Mara sobbed. "I didn't know." "No one does," the caretaker replied. At first. The central tree split open with a wet, grinding sound. Inside was a hollow chamber lined with bone and root, pulsing faintly like a heart. The orchard leaned inward, branches creaking in anticipation. "You'll make a fine tree," the caretaker said. "Strong roots. Many memories." Mara screamed as the earth swallowed her legs, cold and unyielding. Roots pierced her skin, not painfully at first, but insistently, threading through muscle and bone. She felt her thoughts slowing, spreading outward, memories seeping into the soil. She understood then. The orchard didn't kill. It cultivated. By dawn, the fence stood quiet again. A new sapling rose near the center, its bark smooth and pale. A fresh wooden tag hung from its trunk. Mara Holt. Years later, travelers sometimes swear they hear whispering when the wind passes through the dead trees. If they listen closely, the voices beg not for rescue, but to be remembered. And the orchard continues to grow.
Nightmare Sanctuary. The church was never meant to be a place of safety. That was the first thought that crossed Rowan Hale's mind as he stood at the edge of the forest, staring up at the crumbling stone structure perched on the hill. The locals called it the sanctuary, though no one worshipped there anymore. Its stained glass windows were shattered, its bell tower split down the middle like a broken tooth. Yet when nightmares began plaguing the nearby town, violent, shared dreams that left people screaming in their sleep, it was here that everyone said the dreams ended, if you made it inside before dawn. Rowan didn't believe in shared nightmares, but he believed in patterns, and the pattern was impossible to ignore. Every survivor spoke of the same thing, endless corridors, whispering dark, something hunting them just out of sight. And every one of them had sought refuge in the sanctuary, waking the next morning shaken but alive. So Rowan went at night. The doors groaned open with reluctant effort, the sound echoing far longer than it should have. Inside, the air was cold and unnaturally still. No wind, no insects, no distant forest sounds. Just silence so thick it pressed against his ears. Candles lined the nave, already lit. Rowan froze. He hadn't lit them.
Their flames burned low and blue, casting warped shadows across the stone walls. The pews were arranged in a perfect circle around a sunken altar carved with symbols that hurt to look at too long. The smell of old incense lingered, mixed with something sour and organic. A voice whispered behind him, "Enter willingly." Rowan turned, heart hammering. No one stood there. The doors had closed silently, sealing him inside. The sanctuary shuddered. The walls stretched outward, stone melting into darkness. The candles flickered, and suddenly the church was no longer a church. Rowan stood in a vast, endless hall where arches rose into nothingness, their tops lost in shadow. The floor beneath him pulsed faintly like something breathing. The nightmare had begun. Footsteps echoed behind him, not his own, slow, deliberate. Rowan ran. Corridors unfolded endlessly, each turn leading somewhere worse. Rooms filled with kneeling figures whose faces were smooth and blank, mouths sewn shut. When he touched one, it crumbled into ash, whispering his name as it fell apart. The whispers followed him everywhere now, overlapping voices repeating his fears, his regrets, his worst memories. He saw fragments of his life etched into the walls, moments of failure replayed in agonizing detail. The sanctuary fed on guilt. He burst through a set of doors and stumbled into the nave again. The altar awaited him, candles blazing brighter than before. Carved into the stone were hundreds of names, layered and scratched over one another. Some were fresh. A figure rose behind the altar. It wore the shape of a priest, but its body was too tall, its limbs bending at the wrong angles. Where its face should have been was a hollow void filled with writhing shadows. When it spoke, every voice Rowan had heard joined together. "This place keeps you safe from the nightmares outside." Rowan staggered back. "You're causing them." The thing inclined its head. "We are shelter." Understanding struck like ice. The sanctuary didn't stop nightmares. It collected them. Every person who fled here left something behind. Fear, trauma, pieces of their mind. The nightmares outside grew because the sanctuary was full. "You feed on us," Rowan said. "We preserve you. Those who remain are at peace." The shadows behind the altar shifted. Faces emerged, dozens of them, serene, hollow-eyed, unmoving, the missing townsfolk. Rowan felt the pull then, the exhaustion, the promise of rest. The sanctuary whispered to him of sleep without dreams, of silence without fear. He stepped forward, then stopped. "No," he said aloud, forcing the word past, the weight pressing on his chest. "This isn't safety, it's surrender." The priest-shaped thing recoiled slightly, as if surprised. Rowan grabbed a candle from the altar and hurled it at the symbols carved into the stone. The blue flame flared violently, spreading across the markings like spilled fuel. The sanctuary screamed. The hall collapsed inward, walls cracked, shadows tore themselves apart, and the whispering turned to shrieks of rage and hunger. Rowan ran as the doors reappeared ahead of him, sunlight bleeding through the seams. He burst out of the sanctuary just as dawn broke. Behind him, the church stood silent and empty, its candles extinguished, its altar cracked and ruined. The nightmares stopped that night. Weeks later, Rowan returned to the hill. The sanctuary was gone. In its place stood a hollow crater, scorched black, as though something had been ripped violently from the earth. But sometimes, when the wind was right, and the night especially quiet, Rowan swore he could still hear whispers drifting up from the ground below, waiting for someone else to seek shelter.
Harvest of Shadows. The fields around Briar Hollow were golden, heavy with ripe corn that whispered when the wind passed through it. From a distance, the town looked peaceful, almost idyllic, but everyone who lived there knew the truth. The harvest was never just crops. Every year when autumn bled into the land and the moon hung low and swollen in the sky, the shadows came to collect what was owed. Elias returned to Briar Hollow after 15 years away, drawn back by his father's sudden death and the obligation of settling the old farmhouse. The townspeople greeted him with tight smiles and eyes that never quite met his. They all asked the same question: "You stayin' through harvest?" Elias laughed it off, saying he'd be gone before the festival. The laughter died quickly when no one joined in. His childhood home smelled of dust, earth, and something faintly rotten. At night, Elias dreamed of the cornfields stretching endlessly, their stalks bending toward him like grasping fingers. He dreamed of movement between the rows, tall, thin shapes stitched together from darkness, their heads crowned with antlers made of twisted shadow. He woke every night just before dawn, heart racing, convinced something had been standing at the foot of his bed. On the third night, he heard footsteps outside, slow, deliberate. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch. The field shimmered under the moonlight, shadows pooling unnaturally between the rows. Then he saw it, a scarecrow at the edge of the field, one that hadn't been there before. It leaned slightly, its burlapped face stitched into a crooked smile, its clothes rotted and ancient. Elias told himself someone was playing a prank, but when he approached, the air grew cold, and the scarecrow's shadow stretched far longer than its body should allow. He stumbled back as a voice whispered from the corn, "The harvest remembers." The next day, the town gathered for the festival. Lanterns glowed, music played, and tables sagged beneath food. Yet beneath the cheer was tension, a brittle edge of fear. Elias noticed something disturbing. There were fewer people than he remembered. When he asked about old friends, the answers were vague. They left. They moved on. They were taken care of. At sunset, the mayor rang a bell, signaling the start of the final ritual. Elias watched as townsfolk carried baskets of corn to the edge of the fields, setting them down in neat rows. One by one, they pricked their fingers, letting blood drip onto the soil. "What is this?" Elias demanded. His aunt, her face pale and lined with dread, gripped his arm. "It's how we survive," she whispered. "Long ago, this land was starving. We made a deal. The fields would flourish, and in return, the shadows would take those who were forgotten or those who returned." The corn rustled violently. Shapes arose from the darkness, figures woven from shadow and stalks, hollow eyes glowing faintly amber. The scarecrows throughout the field began to move, tearing themselves free from their posts. Screams broke through the festival music as the creatures advanced, unhurried and certain. Elias ran, but the ground seemed to pull at his feet. Shadows clung to him, whispering his name, reminding him of all the years he'd been gone, all the memories he'd abandoned. He reached the center of the field where an old stone altar lay buried beneath vines. There, the tallest shadow waited, its form towering, crowned with antlers dripping darkness. "You left us," it said, its voice a chorus of many. "You forgot." Elias fell to his knees, sobbing. "I didn't know," he pleaded. "I didn't remember." The creature lowered its head. "Then you will feed the land." As dawn broke, the fields of Briar Hollow stood tall and healthy, heavier than ever before. The townsfolk emerged quietly, counting themselves, relieved and ashamed. At the center of the field stood a new scarecrow, its clothes familiar, its face frozen in a look of terror and understanding. And every autumn after, when the corn whispers in the wind, it speaks Elias's name, reminding the town that the harvest of shadows never forgets.
Echoes of Room 112. Room 112 was never listed as occupied. Hospital records skipped it entirely, jumping from room 111 to 113, as if the number itself had been surgically removed. Staff avoided the hallway where it sat, a short wing sealed off by a permanently flickering light, and a security door that never quite latched properly. New nurses learned quickly not to ask about it. They only learned when they heard it. Dr. Eli Mercer first encountered room 112 during a night shift no one wanted. The hospital was understaffed, the halls quiet except for distant monitors and the soft squeak of carts rolling over tile. He was reviewing charts when a call light flickered on at the end of the abandoned wing. Room 112. At first, Eli assumed it was a wiring error. Old buildings had ghosts of their own, malfunctions, echoes, false alarms. Still, Protocol demanded he check. As he walked down the hall, the air grew colder, thicker, carrying a faint smell of antiseptic layered over something older. Like rot, the door to room 112 stood ajar. Inside, the lights were off. Eli reached for the switch. Before his fingers touched it, a sound rose from the darkness. Breathing. Not mechanical. Not labored. Human. Eli stepped back. "Hello," he called. The breathing stopped. Then came the whisper. "Doctor." The voice came from everywhere, walls, ceiling, floor, soft and overlapping, as if dozens of throats were speaking through one mouth. Eli's chest tightened as the lights flickered on by themselves. The room was empty. No bed, no equipment, just scorched outlines on the floor where something heavy had once been bolted down. The walls were scratched raw, deep gouges cutting through paint and plaster. Names were carved into the surface, layered and frantic. Some were crossed out. Some were circled. Eli backed away, heart pounding, but the door slammed shut behind him. The room darkened again. Monitors beeped to life out of nowhere, their screens glowing faintly red. A hospital bed faded into existence at the center of the room, straps hanging loose, stained dark. Shapes formed beneath the sheets, bodies pressing upward, trying to breathe. "You promised," the voices whispered. "You said it would stop." Memories that weren't his flooded Eli's mind. Experiments conducted under cover of night. Patients deemed unrecoverable. Treatments pushed past ethics and sanity. Room 112 had been a containment space for screams, for mistakes, for suffering that couldn't be explained away. The hospital hadn't closed the room. It had buried it. Eli staggered back as figures rose from a bed, translucent forms stitched together from shadow and scar tissue. Faces stared at him with hollow eyes, mouths opening too wide, replaying the moment of realization when hope died. "Listen," Eli gasped. "I didn't do this." The room pulsed. "That doesn't matter," the voices replied. "You hear us now." The walls closed in slowly, breathing with him. Every sound echoed endlessly, the rasp of his breath, the pounding of his heart, the soft weeping that rose beneath it all. The room fed on attention, on acknowledgement, on witnesses. Eli forced the door open and ran, but room 112 followed, in reflections, in elevator mirrors, in the rhythm of beeping monitors that now seemed to whisper his name. At home, the echo continued, faint breathing from behind walls, voices bleeding through silence. "You saw us." Sleep became impossible. His notes filled with symbols he didn't remember writing. Names appeared on his hands when he woke, etched into his skin like pressure scars. When Eli returned to the hospital days later, the hallway to room 112 was gone. In its place stood a blank wall. No door, no light, no record it had ever existed. Relief should have followed. Instead, the echoes grew louder. Eli began hearing them everywhere, in crowded streets, in running water, in the pause between heartbeats. He understood the final truth then. Room 112 was never a place. It was a condition. A space created when suffering was ignored long enough to fold inward. A room that formed wherever pain was denied, wherever silence replaced accountability. And once it noticed you, it followed. On the night Eli vanished, security cameras recorded him standing alone in an empty hallway, speaking softly to no one. The footage showed him opening an invisible door and stepping inside. The hallway was sealed the next morning. Staff still swear they hear breathing near that wall late at night. And sometimes if you walk past slowly enough, you can hear it whisper, "Doctor."
Beneath the surface, the lake was too still. Evan noticed it the moment he stepped out of the car, the engine ticking as it cooled behind him. No ripples disturbed the water, no insects skimmed its skin. Even the breeze that whispered through the surrounding pines seemed to stop short of touching the surface, as if the lake itself repelled motion. It reflected the overcast sky perfectly, a sheet of dull gray glass stretched wide and unbroken. "This place hasn't changed," Mara said, closing her jacket tighter around herself. Her breath fogged in the early autumn air. Evan didn't answer right away. He was staring at the dock, or what remained of it. The wood was darker than he remembered, swollen and warped, sagging into the water like a tired spine. 20 years ago, they had run along those planks barefoot, laughing, daring each other to jump in at night. 20 years ago, something had gone wrong. They hadn't spoken about it since. "You didn't have to come,"
Evan said finally. Mara gave him a look that was half annoyed, half tired. Neither did you, but here we are. The cabin stood a short walk from the shore, half hidden by trees. It leaned slightly to one side, its porch cluttered with dead leaves. The windows were dark, opaque with grime. Evan felt a tightening in his chest as memories pressed in. Summer heat, the smell of damp wood, the sound of water lapping softly against the shore. And beneath it all, the memory he'd spent years trying to bury. Inside, the cabin was colder than outside. Dust coated every surface, and cobwebs stretched like gauze between the rafters. Mara moved carefully, her boots echoing too loudly on the wooden floor. "It smells the same," she muttered, "like mold and copper." Evan swallowed. He smelled it too now, faint, metallic, wrong. They hadn't come for nostalgia. A developer had bought the land, planning to drain the lake and turn the area into a resort. Before that happened, Evan insisted they return. He told himself it was about closure, about making sure there was nothing left down there. The lake had always been deep, deeper than it should have been. Night fell quickly. Clouds swallowed the last of the light, and the forest beyond the cabin windows became a wall of black. They ate in silence, the sound of their chewing uncomfortably loud. Every so often, Evan thought he heard something outside, water shifting, a soft, wet sound like a body moving just beneath the surface. "You hear that?" he asked. Mara shook her head, but her eyes flicked toward the window. "You're imagining it." He wasn't. They went down to the dock just before midnight, flashlights cutting narrow tunnels through the darkness. The lake remained perfectly still, absorbing the beams without reflection. Evan's stomach twisted as he knelt and shone his light into the water. The beam vanished after a few feet. "Still can't see the bottom, even now," Mara said. Evan's hands trembled. "We never could." A memory surged up unbidden, splashing water, laughter turning to panic, the sudden pull from below, fingers like hooks, cold and strong, wrapping around his ankle, the scream that cut off too abruptly. Mara turned away from the water. "We should go back." Something broke the surface. A slow ripple spread outwards, deliberate, controlled. Then another. Evan froze as a shape formed beneath the water, darker than the surrounding blackness, rising. "Mara," he whispered. The water bulged upward, stretching like a membrane. A pale hand pressed against it from below, fingers splayed, too long, joints bent at the wrong angles. Another hand joined it, and then a face, distorted, flattened, eyes open and staring, mouth stretched in a silent scream. Mara screamed for real this time, stumbling back. The surface ruptured. The thing pulled itself halfway out of the lake, water cascading from its skin. Its body was human once. Evan recognized the shape, the height, but wrong now, elongated and swollen as if the lake had reshaped it over decades. Its eyes locked onto him, and he knew with sick certainty that it remembered. It had been waiting. Evan backed away, heart hammering. "We didn't mean to," he said, the words useless and thin. "We were kids." The thing opened its mouth and water poured out, along with a sound like bubbling laughter. It dragged itself closer, leaving a trail of wet, blackened footprints on the dock. Mara ran. Evan followed, the sound of something heavy and wet slapping against wood close behind. The cabin door slammed, the lock clicking, just as something struck the outside wall with bone-rattling force. The windows shuddered, the smell of copper filled the air. From outside came a voice warped and layered as if spoken through water. "Come back! Beneath the surface, we're still together." The pounding began again, slow and patient. The lake had never let go of what it took, and it wasn't finished yet.
Beneath the surface, the lake was too still. Evan noticed it the moment he stepped out of the car, the engine ticking as it cooled behind him. No ripples disturbed the water, no insect skimmed its skin. Even the breeze that whispered through the surrounding pines seemed to stop short of touching the surface, as if the lake itself repelled motion.
It reflected the overcast sky perfectly, a sheet of dull gray glass stretched wide and unbroken. "This place hasn't changed," Mara said, closing her jacket tighter around herself. Her breath fogged in the early autumn air. Evan didn't answer right away. He was staring at the dock, or what remained of it. The wood was darker than he remembered, swollen and warped, sagging into the water like a tired spine. 20 years ago, they had run along those planks barefoot, laughing, daring each other to jump in at night. 20 years ago, something had gone wrong. They hadn't spoken about it since. "You didn't have to come," Evan said finally. Mara gave him a look that was half annoyed, half tired. "Neither did you, but here we are." The cabin stood a short walk from the shore, half hidden by trees. It leaned slightly to one side, its porch cluttered with dead leaves. The windows were dark, opaque with grime. Evan felt a tightening in his chest as memories pressed in. Summer heat, the smell of damp wood, the sound of water lapping softly against the shore. And beneath it all, the memory he'd spent years trying to bury. Inside, the cabin was colder than outside. Dust coated every surface, and cobwebs stretched like gauze between the rafters. Mara moved carefully, her boots echoing too loudly on the wooden floor. "It smells the same," she muttered, "like mold and copper." Evan swallowed. He smelled it too now, faint, metallic, wrong. They hadn't come for nostalgia. A developer had bought the land, planning to drain the lake and turn the area into a resort. Before that happened, Evan insisted they return. He told himself it was about closure, about making sure there was nothing left down there. The lake had always been deep, deeper than it should have been. Night fell quickly. Clouds swallowed the last of the light, and the forest beyond the cabin windows became a wall of black. They ate in silence, the sound of their chewing uncomfortably loud. Every so often, Evan thought he heard something outside, water shifting, a soft, wet sound like a body moving just beneath the surface. "You hear that?" he asked. Mara shook her head, but her eyes flicked toward the window. "You're imagining it." He wasn't. They went down to the dock just before midnight, flashlights cutting narrow tunnels through the darkness. The lake remained perfectly still, absorbing the beams without reflection. Evan's stomach twisted as he knelt and shone his light into the water. The beam vanished after a few feet. "Still can't see the bottom, even now," Mara said. Evan's hands trembled. "We never could." A memory surged up unbidden, splashing water, laughter turning to panic, the sudden pull from below, fingers like hooks, cold and strong, wrapping around his ankle, the scream that cut off too abruptly. Mara turned away from the water. "We should go back." Something broke the surface. A slow ripple spread outwards, deliberate, controlled. Then another. Evan froze as a shape formed beneath the water, darker than the surrounding blackness, rising. "Mara," he whispered. The water bulged upward, stretching like a membrane. A pale hand pressed against it from below, fingers splayed, too long, joints bent at the wrong angles. Another hand joined it, and then a face, distorted, flattened, eyes open and staring, mouth stretched in a silent scream. Mara screamed for real this time, stumbling back. The surface ruptured. The thing pulled itself halfway out of the lake, water cascading from its skin. Its body was human once. Evan recognized the shape, the height, but wrong now, elongated and swollen as if the lake had reshaped it over decades. Its eyes locked onto him, and he knew with sick certainty that it remembered. It had been waiting. Evan backed away, heart hammering. "We didn't mean to," he said, the words useless and thin. "We were kids." The thing opened its mouth and water poured out, along with a sound like bubbling laughter. It dragged itself closer, leaving a trail of wet, blackened footprints on the dock. Mara ran. Evan followed, the sound of something heavy and wet slapping against wood close behind. The cabin door slammed, the lock clicking, just as something struck the outside wall with bone-rattling force. The windows shuddered. The smell of copper filled the air. From outside came a voice warped and layered as if spoken through water. "Come back! Beneath the surface, we're still together." The pounding began again, slow and patient. The lake had never let go of what it took, and it wasn't finished yet.